So now it's my pleasure to introduce Cian McLoughlin. I have immense respect for Cian. He's an author with a best-selling book. He speaks worldwide and is acclaimed wherever he goes as being one of the thought leaders. Cian's got more knowledge than anybody I know in what's going on in the buyer's head and how they go about making decisions and why they make those decisions. So it's an outstanding privilege to me, and I'm sure to all of you, to have Cian speak to us today. Cian McLoughlin.
Morning, folks. Before we get started, can I ask a favor? Today's my 14th wedding anniversary, and I was just wondering if everyone could say hello to my wife, Shelley, just to let her know I'm thinking of her, because we're going to head to Melbourne later on, and so I'm kind of skipping out on our wedding anniversary. So if that's all right. Yeah. Can everyone just say hello, Shelley? Hello, Shelley. Commiseration. Yeah, I switched it off before that, so thank you. Folks, it's really great to be here. I'm excited about this topic. It's one I bang on about continuously, so hopefully there'll be some nuggets of value today. As John said, you're all going to get a copy of the slides, but feel free to take any happy snaps or scribble notes as you go through. Can I just, before we start, just get a quick show of hands? How many of you are working in organizations where your sales cycle is sort of 1 week to 1 month? How many of you wish you were working? Yeah. What about 1 to 2 months? And 3 months or more? Okay, all right. So in that situation, the amount of time, effort, cost of sale, touch points to the customer, and all these other things is pretty, it's pretty significant. And that's on us. That's our industry, and that's our obligation. My hypothesis is really simple. If we've done a good job, we've earned the right to extract some value from that sales process, win, lose, or draw. And that's how I sort of got into doing this a decade ago. I was working for a company called SAP that some of you will probably know. And we were doing big, long sales cycles. And I kept wondering, why weren't we understanding what was happening and then using those insights to get better and lift our game? So it was that simple a premise, and it hasn't changed that much. So let me share a quick story with you. I'm not doing as many win-loss reviews myself now, but I did one yesterday. So this is kind of context for what we're going to talk about this morning. So I sat down with the CIO, and I was there representing the vendor that came second. And they're in the NFP space. And what he very kindly did over 40 minutes or so was he walked through why they went with one vendor and not with another. And it was fascinating. And a whole lot of different insights, a whole lot of things which were very surprising to the vendor that I was there to represent. Now, that's interesting, right? Very, very interesting if you're the vendor and you've been through that process. But how does that feed into what we're talking about today? Well, that vendor and even the sales rep who worked on that deal is working on another deal in the not-for-profit space, which is 2.5 to 3 times the size of the one they lost. They now have the playbook of the competitor who beat them. They know exactly why they lost. They know exactly what they need to do if they want to join the dots and actually have a chance of winning this next piece of business. They don't know for sure that they're competing against the same competitor, but they think there's a high probability because they play a lot in the not-for-profit space. So this is the point. If we're going to call ourselves sales professionals, we have to own the professional bit. And the professional bit is, how do we learn and how do we get better? I've played sport all my life, and in sport, it's just the obvious thing. You watch the game tape back, you learn about your competition, you learn about how you can improve. My hypothesis is we're not doing that as an industry to the degree we should be, and I think we need to lift our game in that area. So I'm going to sort of talk a little bit about that as we go through this morning. Okay? All right, let's crack on. Now, John alluded to this. We're in an incredibly privileged position because we get to sort of play both sides of the fence. I get to talk to sales teams and sales leaders, and they tell me why they won and lost a deal, and then I get to find out why they actually did. And invariably, it's not the same, and often it's incredibly far apart. I personally think that if we can tap into the voice of our customer in a more frequent and consistent way, it unlocks just a mountain of value. And that's kind of the challenge that I've set for myself and the team. So I'll be dropping in quotes from customers over the course of today or this morning, because I think that's the stuff that's the real gold. We tend to do more loss reviews than we do win reviews, and the reason why is people aren't analyzing their wins as much as their losses. My feedback to you would be, think about that concept again, because if you can get the playbook for why you're winning, if you can understand what it is about you that's differentiating you in the context of winning sales cycles, then you could spread that learning across your organization, and a rising tide lifts all boats. I think we need to be much, much better at that. One of the problems with our industry is that salespeople get a quota and then they go chasing after it, and we don't have that much sort of cross-pollination of ideas and collegiate engagement across sales teams. We talk about sales teams, but actually it's silos of individuals all working in the same company. We need to get far smarter at that, because otherwise we're just leaving ourselves open to disruption and all those things. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a little bit of context about how we do the stuff that we do. And I want you to think about this in the context of how you could do it in your organization. So this isn't Trinity spruiking to say, let's come and do it for you. You could do this stuff yourselves, and I would strongly suggest you do. So let me just kind of give some context around that. So what's the problem we're solving? I'd love to pretend it's something really sort of, earth-shattering or rocket sciencey, but it isn't. We're helping organizations better understand why they win and lose the big deals they pitch for, because in my opinion, they've earned the right to that if they've done a halfway decent job. There's the macro problems under that. We're losing deals because we just don't understand why. We don't understand what happened. And I think it was Wayne and I were chatting this morning about, kind of doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome. And we all know that, that's the definition of insanity. But as an industry, we seem to be doing an awful lot of this insane thing, doing an incredibly good job, through the entire sales cycle. And then at the end, that's the bit where we're falling over, when actually we've earned the right to some feedback. One of the issues is great salespeople can sell internally as to why I absolutely should be pursuing this bid and I absolutely need access to all these resources. One of the things we need to get much better at is qualifying out and putting a little bit of framework around our bid no bid process, and a lot of that stems from the feedback of our customers. Talking to the vendor who I spoke to yesterday, now seeing what they see, they're saying we probably wouldn't have qualified out, but we would have qualified in a lot harder, and our expectations of what we wanted from the customer in order to move forward would have been higher. And I think that's something we can do as well. If you do a good win-loss process, it actually gives you more levers to pull and saying, we'd love to work with you, but we need this, this, and this before we're in a position to move forward or unlock our resources or whatever that might be. Some people are really process-driven people, and some people are more sort of relationship-driven, and I think there's value on both. But the thing about having a really consistent sales process is then we get to tweak and test and improve it. If we don't have that sales process in the first place, it's just a free-for-all. And there's a lot of businesses, I'll go in and talk to a business and say, tell me about your sales process. And they'll talk till they're blue in the face. And then I'll say, show it to me. And everyone shuts up because we haven't actually documented it. It isn't structured, it isn't consistent, it isn't repeatable. And in this day and age, we just can't get away with that. I mean, that was great in the 90s where it was just, I think Dan and I were talking this morning about, lack of ink in the fax machine was the biggest issue. It's a brave new world. We have to get so much better. We have to own that professionalism piece. We don't know why we're strong and why we're weak some of the time, because we eat our own dog food so much. We have all this, marketing collateral and, differentiators. And I think we all know that our differentiators line up very nicely with some of our competitors' differentiators, therefore nullifying them, and they're not differentiators at all. But what's really interesting is what's a differentiation through the lens of the customer. The CIO I spoke to yesterday, one of the things he said was, we had this idea about what we wanted to do, and all of the vendors we spoke to, and they went out to 9 initially, told us how they would deliver on that, except for one. And one of them said, that's not the thing you need to do. Here's where we did that with another customer and it failed dismally for these reasons. We think you should do it this way. And that, to me, is kind of what it's about now, to be a professional seller. We have to come with, as Tony would say, we have to come with insight. We have to come with experience and credibility and the confidence to push back in an appropriate way and say, hear what you're saying. Let's focus on the outcome you're trying to get to. This might be a better way. So almost treat customers like customers before they ever become a customer, which seems a little bit counterintuitive. What else? I love the data that we get. So we've got 10 years of data talking to customers all over the world about what influenced their buying decision. And some of the qualitative, I'm going to share some stuff with you in a little while. Some of the qualitative data is in some ways more compelling than the quantitative, even though quantitative should be, because hey, we're seeing all these trends across the data. But when a customer sits down and tells you, how appalling your RFP response was, or how amazing one person was, and ultimately that was, part of their decision-making process. There's gold in there, and we need to be mining that gold, and I think we're not doing it to the degree we should be. This lack of independence, and this is one of the reasons that we do what we do, because firstly, it's hard to unlock feedback if the feedback is about you. So if you're sitting down opposite, let's say, the CIO yesterday, and some of the feedback he wants to provide is about you or your boss, just human nature, that's slightly awkward. But then the next tricky thing is, what do you do with that? So you have to have a culture internally of saying, we have an appetite for this feedback and we'll take some action, rather than, we're going to use it to come down hard on the people who are involved in the deal, or, and we've seen examples of this, we're going to stick it back under the rug because it's just too politically sensitive or too hard to deal with or whatever. So, if you shine a light on something, you can't unsee it. So you have to have the appetite to say, we want this feedback. Feedback is a gift as far as I'm concerned. And invariably, it's one of two things. It's either positive or constructive. It's almost never just negative for the sake of negativity, in our experience. And it just feeds into everything. The whole process becomes just so much more engaging when we have this. Because those meetings where you sit in and you go, should we do this? Should we do that, from a sales training, enablement, support perspective? And what we're doing is taking educated guesses all the time. And I've spoken to lots of sales leaders, and they're like, yeah, I had a 50K budget. I was like, negotiation. And that's it. And so you're going to drop 50K on negotiation. Is that the thing we should be doing? I don't have a clue, but I had to spend my budget. And, we could always do with better negotiation skills. That's too random. That is just too vague. We have to be much more pinpointed. And the nice thing about unlocking this stuff is if you do it, all the noise goes away. So people can agree or disagree with the customer's opinion, but if you have enough of it, kind of doesn't matter, because it's saying, this is what we're hearing, this is what we need to go away and take action on. So that's what I encourage you to think about. Right, some of you might have seen this, because I've talked about this a couple of times. I'm not going to spend a long time, but I just think, because of the audience we have today, you might enjoy 2 minutes on why do you win big deals and why do you lose big deals. Is people up for that? I always start with the losing. So why are we losing? Generic content. Generic RFPs, generic, where we've done a search and replace on the last company's name, stuck in this company's name, didn't realize it was capitalized and not capitalized, so actually we get caught out. People are just sick to death of that, So if everyone's sick of generic, go tailored, go personalized, go relevant for the right deals. If you're not giving a very, win theme oriented, bespoke response to a significant opportunity, you're just missing the mark. We had a vendor that won a $50 million piece of business, and their RFP response was so poor, they were almost kicked out at the very, very start. And they changed their bid management process overnight based on that feedback. Often we're chasing business needs that just don't really exist. This is an interesting one, because people will push back and say, well, Cian, it's not about emotional connection. It's about product and price and whatever. And it is, to a point. And after that point, it's about risk mitigation. And it's about, I want to see the whites of your eyes, and who else have you worked with, and what's going to happen when the shit hits the fan, and all these other things, which are EQ, not IQ, which are people, not product related. And as an industry, one of the big mistakes we're making is we're selling only to people's heads. But actually, a lot of people buy with their hearts and justify with their heads, and we've missed that mark quite badly. And those that are getting that are being incredibly successful, because the best product doesn't win. The best pitch wins, and the best pitch is the one that the customer feels is most aligned with, with their vision of the future, or what their problems are. If I was to say anything to you about winning big deals, I would say, be the one that best manages and mitigates the risk. At an organizational level, absolutely, but at an individual level. So this CIO yesterday, one of the things he said was, this is my reputation on the line. I'm the one, going out, and so I need the company that's going to get me there and give me the most confidence that they'll do that. Risk mitigation is one of the key things that you can do differently, and share the risk, and put things into your proposals that say, if this, then that, and own some of that and push that back, or take that back from the customer, and you'd be amazed at how the dynamics shift. The other thing I'd say is focus on your customer's customer, not the person opposite you, but who they have to deliver an outcome to, and get around their side of the table and say, how are we going to do that jointly? Look, this is kind of an obvious one. I remember an example back when I was at SAP, and there was a colleague at another business who said, we're working on this deal, we're going to win it. And I said, you've already lost it. He It's like, what are you talking about? Because we had engagement at a different level, so we knew the deal was done, and they hadn't even been informed. Weak or no win themes. What do I mean by that? Does anyone, Tony, do you want to hazard a guess? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, so the win themes are the unique reasons why they should go with you and not somebody else, and closely linked to their business value and lowest risk.
100%. We've all heard the expression, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Value's in the eye of the beholder as well. So this comes back to really good discovery and needs analysis. The better we do that bit at the front end, the easier it is for us to join the dots around the stuff that we can do well. Because otherwise it's just throwing mud at the wall and hoping some of it sticks. But if we've done that first piece really well, then all of a sudden, value is such a throwaway word, but the perception of differentiation happens. So don't rush that. Tell your teams not to rush that. The discovery is where customers will tell us how to sell to them, teach us how to sell to them, even if we just listen. We just didn't differentiate. If we do a win review or a loss review and they say it was an apples for apples decision, what that means is none of the vendors really differentiated. And then what they'll do is they'll default to the lowest price, usually. So we have to get much, much better at that. Not seen as an industry leader, that's happening, a lot, where it's, look, they were really, really good, but they were too niche, they were too new, they were too startup-y, and that was too risky for us. So that's something for the smaller businesses to be very cognizant of. And then the other thing is, we've all got a finite amount of resources in our business, and they're stretched. We have to be much, much better at how we manage those. And some of that comes back to bid management and saying, no, we're not going to give you access to our resources unless you meet these thresholds. Because otherwise, what we're doing is we're just stretching them to breaking point. People are doing tender responses on the weekend, and we flick it back together and pop it over the fence to the customer, and the customer looks at it and goes, this is gibberish, because it's like a Frankenstein's bride, because we've used our scarce resources in a poor way. So we need to get better at that. Okay, so that's why we lose. Why do we win? Thought leadership is a funny term. It gets thrown around all the time. Thought leadership for me is, it hurts a little bit to give it away because it's a little bit like your secret sauce, and then people will engage with it. Otherwise, it's just an ad dressed up as content or whatever. We need to get much better at that. For 3, 6, 9, 12, 18-month sales cycles, there's a myriad of things that change. We need to get much better at validating those assumptions. I've seen so many salespeople who are completely blindsided by something that shifts in the landscape of the customer over that time period. So we need to get much, much better at that. Risk mitigation. Cultural fit's a big one as well. And cultural fit's interesting because it covers a huge amount of territory. And it's a great one for customers to use if they want to explain why they didn't go, it was a cultural fit issue. Can you just expand on that? Yeah, that we hated them. They were incredibly arrogant. Okay, thanks. Yeah, that's really good. Yeah. I know added value is again one of those terms that doesn't mean anything anymore. But for me, if you find a way to add value, small or large, at each step of the process, apart from them thinking you're going to be good to work with, you also trigger that sneaky human emotion of reciprocity, and they're going to want to reciprocate the value back to you in some way, shape, or form, which is hugely important to us as we move through a sales cycle. As I said, focus on our customer. References are becoming really, really interesting, and you need to be really careful. Stop putting up 20, 30 logo slides. Does anyone want to, throw out a reason why you should stop doing that?
Everyone else does.
No one else? Everyone else does, yeah.
Because your competitor has the same slides as well.
Yeah, but an even more compelling reason than that. Tony?
The danger is you lose control. You'll always have a percentage of those that are unhappy.
So what you're doing is you're creating reference checking immediately. People are picking up the phone going, I know someone there, and you lose control of that straight away. We've seen a lot of deals get lost at that point. So my advice is put up 3, tailor them for each presentation, and explain why you've put up that one. They have a similar need to you. They're in a similar industry. These guys could be a good company for you to have a conversation down the track. So it ring fences it, but it also personalizes it, so it's a double whammy. So we need to get much better at that. Emotional connection, you might disagree, I don't care, because it's actually really critical. Answer the so what question. What's the so what question? When you're standing up presenting, if people are sitting in the audience going, so what? Why should I care? It doesn't mean the thing that you're saying isn't relevant, but you're not giving them the context. And information in isolation is pointless. So we need to get much, much, much better at giving the context around the cool stuff that we do or whatever. And once we can join the dots, then it becomes relevant. So I'll show you a slide at the back end where we talk about that. Here, what about this one? A quick show of hands. How many people believe their business is easy to do business with at the moment? Isn't that interesting? And there's a couple of half hands. Oh, not really, but maybe. Like, customer experience is going to be the price of, the price of doing business over the next few years. It's as simple as that. So if our internal processes are making it harder for people to buy from us. We just got to fix that. We've just got to fix that. Because we're seeing that all the time. I like really simple stuff. Because you think about how hard it is to build trust and how easy it is to lose that trust. If it takes someone like 6 phone calls to get through to someone to have the first conversation, or if you gate all your content, so every time they try and download something, they're getting hassled by some inside salesperson, what you're doing is you're making it really hard to buy from you, and as a result, they'll buy from someone else. It's as simple as that. The companies that are really getting that customer experience piece are just making it so bloody easy to buy from them that people just want to, because it's actually quite a nice process. All right, let me just quickly show you something, and then we're going to have a bit of a pause for a table discussion. So this is kind of the process that we do, and you can absolutely do this yourselves in your business. So who do we want to chat to? What do we want to ask them about? And again, this isn't rocket science. Well, help us understand what our marketing was like, what we like to engage with. What about our tender responses? What about from a pricing perspective? How do we stack up with our competitors relative to this, this, and this? What about when we got to contracts and legals? You know, was it easy, was it hard? So it's just break down your sales cycle into its component parts. I just ask about it. And then you'll find out stuff, and then you'll test it and improve it over time. So that gives you the customer experience piece. But then this is the key bit. You have to be willing to take some action. And if you are, all sorts of amazing things can happen. If you're not, don't bother, because it's actually quite a bit of effort to do this in the first place. You don't want to tell your customers and your sales team, actually, we've changed our minds. We've decided this is a little bit too politically sensitive, so just go back to what you were doing. It's not a great look, and I've seen it done, so. Okay. So just a bit of a table discussion, and then we can share. So what stood out from these customer insights? What did you scribble down? Why don't we do more win-loss, or why don't you do more? And how could this sort of data, how do you think it might shape future sales activities? So John, what, about 5 minutes as a chat on the tables? This is a conversation I think that can run and run, and it's a really, really interesting one. I might just quickly get a little bit of feedback from a couple of tables. Anyone had yes?
The art of selection and deselection before you start engagement. So a lot of people may lose deals, but you've got to ask yourself the question, were we ever going to win those deals? Were they the right accounts to give us propensity to win?
Yep.
And when I go through all the clients that we work with, very few do proper segmentation. Generally you get, well, I've got 10 reps, these are the industries we go for, I'm going to split them up, and there you go, rep, you've got 100 accounts, go find who the contacts are and make it happen.
And by the way, you need 4 times cover on your
That's
number,
exactly right. So it's a failed science as well.
Yeah.
So I think that if we can fix the segmentation, we're only working with organisations with a high propensity to win. You need less sellers. High propensity to win is going to always give you the results you want as well, and it costs you less.
Spot on. Thanks, John.
Can I just expand on that?
Please, Steve. Yeah.
You often see people say we win one in 5, so we need 5 times a pipeline. To me, a better solution is to win 1 in 2 and have a smaller pipeline but a better one.
Yeah. A question I often ask when people say we win 1 in 3 or 1 in 4, I'm like, does that mean your competitors aren't closing any deals that you're not aware of? And they're like, oh, no, they're definitely. And I said, well, then you're winning 1 in like 8, 9, 10. I'm like, oh, yeah, okay. Any other feedback? Yep, over the back.
Yeah, we worked on a deal for around 14 months, large deal across Australia and New Zealand. 12 companies from the loss, we actually lost it, we came second. 12 companies went for it. From the loss review, there was 8 people on the buying panel who basically analysed all the tenders. And there was 2 people that we just didn't have any emotional connections with or any relationships with. 2 very senior people. We did try and actually reach out to these people over the course of the 12 months, but we were blocked. So we've done a lot of work internally to see how can we actually get to the C-suite, how can we get to some of these key decision makers to create that emotional connection for the next time.
And sometimes we have to use that as a qualify out, even if just as a lever to say, unless we can,
They stayed with the incumbent,
Yeah.
they tried and tested.
Yeah.
We were seen as too risky, but those
And
two
Donica, let me
individuals.
ask you this. Would you have any idea what your cost of sale was on that deal?
Uh,
I mean, you could pick a
Yeah.
number, but you wouldn't, because we don't do that. We very rarely do we have any kind of real clarity around what our cost of sale is. So we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars in pursuits all the time across our industry, and no one has a clue how much it's costing us. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Thanks. We'll just do one more, and then we'll keep going.
Just an observation, looking at the capabilities and skills you need nowadays to be a effective salesperson. I think there's a cultural problem in the sales industry. I said it before to the table here. I think there's an issue with inspection, and it's seen as judgment. And if we change that and see feedback as a gift, as you would say and others
Yep.
would say,
Yep.
I think there's an opportunity to change it. So I think the role's changing. You need to be constantly developing and moving along as a salesperson. I think that's at the heart of the issue. The sales leadership needs to change.
I agree. And the culture of a business to say, this is an opportunity for us to improve. Put it this way, I had a chat to that sales rep yesterday, and he was incredibly grateful because now he's got something he can use to hopefully win his next deal rather than just walking away with nothing. So we need the reps saying, I want this. And if they say, the whole thing will change. Okay, all right, let's crack on. Thanks, John. So I want you to do a little sort of role play in your mind. You're a head of sales for a global organization. You're carrying a stupidly big quota, like $1 billion plus, and you've lost more deals than you would care to admit. Let's put it that way, because that's what we're going to talk about now. So this really happened. I'll change the names to protect the innocent. I want to give you a sense of some of the nuggets of value that are out there, and I want you to start thinking in the context of how do you unlock them. So, quote from the customer: "We're trying to buy something like 5 or 6 end-to-end services. What we were getting back from this vendor in the contract was like 26 products. So we talk SaaS in our marketing, but you know what? We're really still selling, siloed, enterprise, old school, blah, blah, blah. But, if you read our marketing materials, you won't get that because, we still pretend to be a SaaS company. We've got to be really, really careful because you just get found out very, very quickly. So key program stats. It's not a ton of reviews. I mean, it was like, what did we do? Like 10 reviews or something like that. About 35 specific findings. $300+ million of lost revenue. 5 continents. Cost of sale associated with these, no clue. No clue. Couldn't even hazard a guess. Right. So what did we do? We just engaged with all of those customers and we spoke to them. And we found out chapter and verse what had happened. And then we sort of put a bit of structure around it and said, all right, key trends, structural issues. So challenges with the product offering and the solution. Pricing issues, cost and complexity. Challenges navigating the head office and the culture of the business. Not seen as a market leader in certain geographies. So these are some of the structural things. And we try and break it down because from a change transformation perspective, you've got to be able to sort of highlight what the problem is and then go away and take some action. Sales skills. So sales process issues across the board. Sales skills and execution challenges, missed SLAs, just certain basic things, and then a ton of other stuff. Challenges navigating the head office again, poor management of SLAs, poor use of reference customers, local billing issues, personnel issues, customer support issues. So, not great if you're that person, but specific, right? So then what we did with this particular organization, we dived a little bit deeper and said, all right, it's great to say sales process and sales professional challenges. What does that mean? As we refined our requirements, requests weren't being met by this vendor due to their business processes and practices. We were getting more of a response on those from other vendors. It looked unfavorable. It surprised everybody because no one else missed the SLAs. We'd go into a meeting with this vendor having asked for something specifically, but what was presented didn't reflect that or was a different look at what we'd previously discussed. They basically presented the whole RFP, every word of it. It took 4 hours. Now, one of the questions we'll often get asked is, how do you find this stuff out? This is unbelievable. And we're like, well, because we talk to the customers and we ask them. And if you've done a good job, even if you've lost, the professional thing to do. I said to the CIO yesterday, mate, why did you make the time for this? And he said, look, they finished second. They worked really hard. They did a good job. They just happened to be up against a company that was incredibly good. So, it's an appropriate professional thing to do, to give the feedback. Most customers, if you ask them in the right way at the right time, will be very, very happy to share this. So what we did then was we said, all right, well, let's talk about the reference customer issues. We're seeing a ton of companies who are actually doing really bad references. And I don't mean the end customer. I mean the vendor saying, go and talk to these people. They use that product. Did you check with them? Are they happy? Are they support calls? Are they escalations? Are they... No, because we know they use that product. Oh, okay, right. Like deals being destroyed at the reference stage. And this CIO yesterday said he had an amazing reference from the company he picked. CIO and CEO both went, these guys are unbelievable. Everything they say, they deliver on. They take a huge amount of the risk away from us. We love them. We would never go back. And it was so compelling. So the right reference can be really, really important. The wrong reference will literally torpedo you no matter what else is happening. They couldn't show the same level of support for the same service. We wanted coverage in all our Asia-Pac countries. Yeah. They clearly had those different silos. The reference calls we had enforced that impression. I can't even tell you how frustrating it is for me to talk to customers and they say, like, really bad reference. It didn't seem like they had actually thought about who they were going to give us, because they gave us the worst possible person to speak to. We've got to get better at referencing if we're going to do it at all. They will do the peer referencing anyway, but if we've got control over it, you've got to get better. Challenge is navigating internal complexity. I have the impression there are many ineffective processes with this vendor which reflect problems in our account. Examples I can give are financial process and their internal admin. It's not an understatement to say it's a mess. Their internal processes do not work. So this was what we would call a health check, where we actually spoke to an existing customer who was looking to expand their footprint. The other vendors were more cohesive. They had a better understanding of the overall offering, not needing to bring 2 or 3 experts for every single thing. I lost a deal while I was at SAP, and I happened to do a loss review. And the vendor we lost to said, SAP is a great solution, but it's a little bit complicated. You know, they'll probably bring 3, 4, or 5 people in to present to you because it's quite a complicated solution. And we were like, nah, we brought in 8 people. So the customer's just like, what the hell? But we didn't know this, and we walked, all these landmines, and we stepped on because they were just better at selling and, you know, smarter and all those other things. It's obviously the way the company's built. They structure themselves in those different elements where the service elements are based on the traditional setup. To bring this together would mean they would need to change their whole organizational structure and governance and so on. This obviously takes time. That's an understatement. It takes an awful lot of time. But more importantly, it takes the will to do it. So this is the stuff that's there. It's available to us. But we just need to get smarter and better about saying, let's do it. I'll often do, you know, sales kickoffs and conferences and events, and I'll always ask for a customer to come in. I'll usually interview them, and then we'll open up to the group. And invariably, I'll, you know, work my ass off for a couple of days to build this amazing content, and then the feedback from the audience is, oh, the best bit was the customer. The best bit was the customer. Because it is the best bit. Because having a customer internally talking Chatham House rules, you can ask them anything, is awesome. We need to be doing it more. Bring them inside the tent. Don't leave them outside. And, you know, if we build it, they will come. Bring them in and ask them. You know, we need to get smarter about this. Okay, so second discussion topic on your tables. As a sales leader, what's the first thing you would do if you had heard that feedback that I just shared? And how might it change your sales enablement focus? So I had a conversation with a global head of sales who was pretty shocked to find out some of the things. So what do you think he will then go away and do on? Oh. I don't know if that's an option. Ideally not. So just take just a couple of minutes on your table. Anything come through apart from committing suicide? Is there any other suggestions? Yes.
Yeah, probably the question was, out of the feedback you receive, what belongs to you can own as a head of sales,
yeah,
and what proportion you need to act as a company. You need to get the buy-in from other departments, being the products, R&D, marketing, to make any change.
Absolutely. And where we've seen it done best is where they say, right, that's the feedback. Now let's break that down into its component parts, and let's put a project and owner against that. And what we want to do is move it from, you know, from orange to green or from red to orange, and actually kind of push out the ownership across the business. Because if it stays in sales, it's actually it's not going to get the traction you need it to, because there's so many touch points into these deals. It's not just about selling. John?
I think step one is you've got to let the senior leadership team know about it. I mean, the fish stinks at the head. And the amount of companies that most of us work with, that the senior leadership team have no idea what's really going on. So I think you start there, and then once that's done, you make changes that can be made immediately. And then if there's structural changes, then you've got to agree what they are, when they can be done, and if they can be done. If they can't be done, you change your segmentation, back to segmentation. So for the SAP situation, if you require 8 people, they only work with the companies that only require very complex deals, so to speak.
Or you explain at the front end why you're bringing in these different subject matter expert stakeholders rather than just wheel them all in. Interestingly, I shared a variation on this deck with that head of sales, and I tagged it in HubSpot when I shared it, and I know it's been opened and shared 260 plus times with his senior leadership team since then. So that's a reasonable sign that there's a level of engagement around that. Okay, so what I want to do is just talk in this last section about, great, that's all interesting. How do we put it all together? Great, now what can you do? And I talked about that so what thing, so we'll come back to that in a second now. Just another quote. I just love throwing in quotes from customers because that's the stuff that, you know, following up on things in writing. Here's just a little nugget. Like if you have a meeting with a customer or one of your team does, get an email out to them within 24 hours, just playing back to them what you heard and you know, making sure you're all on the same page, and then maybe kind of, you know, shared actions and whatever. It's, you know, a lead kind of withers on the vine after, you know, a certain period of time, A sales meeting is exactly the same. You know, the amount of time it takes for you to respond to them diminishes the level of engagement. And the flip side is if you respond in an appropriate amount of time and with the right amount of kind of detail around this is what I heard and this is, people just, they're so happy. They're like, oh, thanks very much. That was really good. And yeah, or you give them the opportunity to say, well, actually, no, it was more on this. But that's okay as well because we're just reducing obstacles to our sales cycle. Okay, so what do I mean by answer the so what question? This is something that from back in my career, and it's just come up again and again, we used to do dry runs of presentations, and they'd invite people in who weren't involved in the deal, and they'd all get to have a little sign and hold it up and say, so what? Every time we gave information in isolation without context, and they took great joy in holding it up, you know, like ice dancing scores or whatever. So I'll just give you a couple of examples. We've got lots and lots of customers. Look at all their logos. Big deal. We've got thousands of business customers. I'd like to highlight 3 specific customers to talk about due to the similarity in their business pains. These might be good customers for you to speak to as references down the track. See the difference? What we've done is we've inserted the so what. Why should I care? This is why you should care. Oh, okay, cool. Thank you. It's just so simple, but it's a muscle memory thing that we need to get better and better at. We have 2,000 staff focused on innovation. Big deal. We're really proud of our innovation and the awards we receive because we've done these in conjunction with our customers. Hopefully the project we're about to embark on is one that'll drive some innovation and might be put forward for some awards. Now I care, because now that speaks to your commitment and your value and all that sort of thing. We're represented in 3,000 locations around the world. We have a global coverage model which gives you peace of mind that we have people to support you. But just give the context. Like we have all these mountains of value, but because we've said it so many times, it's just this kind of show up and throw up mentality, which kind of defeats the purpose because they're hearing it for the first time, but we're like, oh, here we go again. And that's the other thing. Stop following this invisible script as to how to sell. And it's like, right, I must be vanilla and bland and, you know, formulaic and, you know, start with our story and end with. You don't have to do any of that. Like, where's your hook? Where's the engagement? Where's the personalization? There aren't enough opportunities out there to just be bland and vanilla. So let's, you know, add a bit of mint chocolate chip, which is my favorite ice cream. Align with your customer's buying cycle. Match where they're at. What do I mean by this? I did some work with a company in Perth, and they had it was a company actually based in New Zealand. They had a rep who joined them in Perth, and he had been on the customer side. And he said to me, Cian, I don't really understand how the steps of the sales cycle work. And I was like, that's fine. We can walk you through that. But he said, I really understand how the steps of the buying cycle work because I bought as a customer from this vendor. I was like, great. Show me how that worked for you. So he mapped that out. And then he did something really smart. He took the one-page map of the buying cycle and the one-page map of the sales cycle, and when he went in and sat down with a new prospect, he used that and said, this tends to be the steps we go through on the sales side. This was what I went through as a customer when I bought. How does that line up with what you guys are doing? And they're like, oh no, we have a form of procurement. So they created a common language around the engagement they were about to embark on and an understanding of the different, you know, trigger points. And none of his deals go quiet. He doesn't win all his deals, but people don't feel pressured because the reason most deals go quiet is a misalignment between where they're at and where we're at. So we have to do a much, much better job of that matching exercise. And this is the first guy I've ever known to take it to the point of actually laminating a sheet and bringing it in and sitting down. And it's just changed the nature of the conversations. Because now people, you know that way you walk into a shop and someone says, you know, can I help you? No, I'm just browsing. People want to be able to browse, but they also want the right help. And so he's given them permission to say, browse away. This is what the process will look like on our side. You let us know what it'll look like on your side. Such a simple thing. And this last one, about selling to people's heads rather than their hearts, is a fundamental mistake we're making as a business. The thing I've observed, and I've talked about this on stage and in podcasts and wherever anyone will have me, is product and price are really important at getting you from the long list to the short list. And then they get put to one side. You know, price point, yeah, they're in the ballpark. Product, yeah, broadly fit. Okay, now what else have you got for us? And all of the other now what else have you got for us stuff is more, you know, risk, people, purpose, EQ driven than it is IQ driven. And we're actually pretty good at the first bit and we're pretty crap at the second bit. And we need to get much, much better at the second bit. Because if you can get both those things working together in harmony, you're literally golden, right? Your hit rate will go through the roof. But it's easier said than done. Okay. So that's just a couple of things to think about in terms of, right, if we find stuff out, what do we then go away and think about and how do we change? And this isn't big strategic change necessarily. Some of this is really tactical, really kind of sales specific. And that's okay because then that wins us the deal next week rather than the deal next year. And let's be honest, most of us are focused on the deal next week. Okay, so what can you change today? Just avoid the worst excesses of sales, right? We win and lose by 2% increments a lot of the time, certainly when we get into the short list. We've got to get better at all the little stuff, right? Quality of, tender responses, SLAs, right team on the park, all those sort of things. Just no excuse for getting that wrong anymore. We've got to get better at, innovation and disruption are lovely buzzwords. What do they mean? They mean don't just do the same thing over and over again. Like break the model a little bit. Because customers, if you do it in the right way, will really respond to that. But it has to be in the right way. Answer the so what question every time. Don't just focus on the customer's, on your sales cycle. Focus on the customer's buying cycle. That's a whole different way to think about it, and a much, much, much better way. I bet you all have really, really amazing people. Don't hide their light under a bushel and think your brand is the brand. No one cares about your brand. Your people are the personification of your brand. So we think we're buying a brand, but actually we're not. We're buying the people who personify that brand. So if I have a really good interaction with Paul from Workday, I'm going to think Workday is an unbelievable company. But if I have a poor interaction with one of his colleagues, I'm going to think, they're not so good. So we have to get much better at recognizing that our people are intrinsically linked to our brand and vice versa. And then, last but not least, if you walk out of here today and you spend a couple of hours thinking, how could we get a little bit easier to do business with? I promise you, it'll help you out. Okay. So I just wanted to quickly talk about something that we're doing. And I said to John earlier, I don't want this to be seen as selling from the front of the room, please. So don't think about it that way. One of the things we've been trying to do is crack the nut of so we interview people, and that's great, but it's not super scalable. We're looking at ways to say, how can we scale it without losing the value of that interview piece? And so we sort of thought through, it's by no means settled, but we're looking at how we would put a platform together. We're going to do some stuff to try and get us there, to try and lower the price point, but also increase the scalability piece. So if there's any companies in this room, and I'll talk about this in Melbourne tomorrow, that think, oh yeah, that could be interesting, we'll have a look at that. We're looking to have some chats to some beta customers who say, come in and have a play, we'll rip it apart and put it back together for you, we'll give you some feedback. So if that's of interest to anyone, come and have a chat or reach out, and there might be a fit. That's it. That's all I had to say. Bang on time, John. So hopefully that's
well
good.
done.
Thank you, Cian.
Morning, everybody. I'm Paul from Workday. Cian, I'd like to ask you a question about some of the things you put up a wee bit earlier. A number of us have been sales leaders in the room, and when you were going through why you lose big customers, I couldn't help feeling there's a lot of stuff in there that we all know. Yet we know we didn't do that, and we know we didn't do that, and we know we didn't do this. And yet something will happen, some deal will fall out of the pipe in Q3 or whatever, or the next shiny rock will come along, and we'll all go, yep, sounds fantastic, we're really busy on that thing over there.
Yeah.
How do you think we ensure consistency of execution once we set some parameters around this?
I think one of the things we've found is it has to come from the top, because if you're expecting your salespeople and your sales managers to take responsibility for this, but also saying, by the way, every week's a month, every month's a quarter, and every quarter is the most important quarter there's ever been or there will ever be, it's pretty hard for them to then say, well, let me think about something which might move the needle, but it might take a little bit of time to move the needle. So when we get brought in by the board, when we get brought in by the C-suite, that tends to be where we see culturally, a level of maturity that says, we want to be in business in 12, 18, 24 months. Every year we're getting, 10% growth year on year with no real science behind how they arrived at that number, bar just like, okay, yeah, or you're Asia Pacific, you guys are growing, so here, have a big number. So we have to get smarter. And the only mechanism that I've found to do it really, really quickly is tap into what our customers think and then either do more of the stuff they like or do less of the stuff they dislike. So it comes back to the culture of the business and the appetite to actually execute. And if they keep moving back to a quarterly, monthly, knee-jerk focus, then we would qualify out early because there's no point. There's literally no point. And you know what? They'll get found out over time anyway, or they'll do more and more unnatural acts to try and get to a number which is getting further and further away, and then they'll change out their sales force and do all that sort of stuff, which is way more time-consuming and expensive and painful than saying, maybe we should just take a little bit of our medicine now. So does that answer your question? Yeah. Thanks, Paul. Pri, and then we'll come to you.
Hi, my name is Pri, and I'm the Chief Advisor at Switch Careers and Recruitment. 10 years as an AE and sales manager, and then 10 years as a recruiter. The number one thing that stood out from what you said to me when I look at successful, large value deal winners is that emotional connection and their ability to actually help the customer buy, then be focused on what they have to sell.
Yeah.
My question is, how do we en masse switch the industry from being focused on their quota, their deal, their number, to actually helping the customer buy and align with purpose, so that the customer sees the win, whether it's the innovation and so on and so forth.
So look, there's three things that occur to me. The first is, people will behave how they're compensated to behave. So we need to ensure that the KPI structure isn't binary and says you get to a number and everything else is forgivable, because we know what that does. That can lead to all sorts of huge cultural issues and a ton of other stuff as well. So there's the KPI piece. Then there's the the development piece. It's all well and good to tell people, we want you to engage through emotional intelligence and relationships and insight and curiosity and storytelling and all that sort of stuff. And they're like, yeah, I don't know how to do any of that, and I feel super uncomfortable. So we have to actually give people, the opportunity, enable and support them in a real way, not in a, there's 2 days training, off you go, and why aren't you telling more stories? And the third thing I think is it's a cultural thing for an organization to say, we're a purpose-driven business, right? Some businesses, their values and their purpose is in a little frame sitting on a wall, and that's it. And then other businesses, they walk and talk that. It's very difficult sometimes to differentiate between 3 or 4 very similar offerings, but nobody can push back on your purpose. They mightn't agree with it, but they can't push back, because if you live it and you breathe it, then it imbues every part of the business. So purpose is huge, and then people, and allowing people to be seen as an asset and not just something that enables the sales process. That would be probably how I'd think about it, Pri. Thanks for your question.
It's Clarence here from Walk Me. Pri actually just asked the same question that I was going to ask in a far more articulate way, I think. But I would like you to explore a little bit more. Excuse me. Walk Me is a very disruptive company. I'm quite interested in your global take on how organisations are disrupting the way they ask those questions of themselves, and how they implement that sort of change, and where you've seen really good and really bad examples. Because a lot of times I think the questions we ask as first-line, second-line managers really influence the way that people answer those sorts of challenges about how to ask with empathy, how to lead with EQ versus IQ and all that. So I'm interested in global view on what good looks like with that.
Really good looks like more time in the discovery piece. Call it discovery, call it needs analysis, like if you walk into a doctor's office and you say, I've got a really bad headache, and the doctor's like, right, take 2 of these, and see me in a week. You'd be like, well, hang on, you didn't do any diagnosis. You just jumped straight to the, to the cure. We're doing that as an industry all the time. Even if you think about the language, we talk about, I'm going to come in and do a solution demo, right? Oh, that's interesting. Do you want to understand my problem? No, let's just jump straight to my solution. So we have to put, more time and more structure around how are we finding out? Like, how do we know if we can add any value at all? Put all of the onus on them. Like 95% of the conversation should be them talking about stuff and us going, okay, that's interesting, tell me more. So I think we need, if we're going to coach anywhere, that's probably one of the areas to coach people on, is how to get more comfortable. I did built a global program for a vendor to help enable their sales team around the world. And it was quite a young sales team. And a lot of it is a lack of confidence. So if I'm sitting with someone who's maybe significantly older and or more experienced, what I'll do is I'll default to the stuff that I know and the stuff that I've been taught. And that tends to be the product and price stuff. So then I'm sitting here, and this person's going, oh, well, this isn't a ton of value, really. Because if you came in with insight or even intelligent questions, one of the questions I'll always say is, what happens if you do nothing? You're like, status quo and do nothing tend to be the outcome a lot of the time. Tell me about that. Why are you coming out to market in the first place? Help us understand that. Be ready to qualify out, because that actually gives you more power in the relationship, not in a negative way, but to say, unless we think you're going to do something, unless we think we can help, let's not waste each other's time. And we need to be able to unlock that, to break out of that just, here's our RFP, you respond to it, and then we'll see where we go. And it's just rolling the dice. So I think the best organizations, the other thing about the best organizations is they're really easy to do business with because they've looked at all the different parts. So when you reach out to them, they're really responsive. When you Google stuff, you find their information, and it's nice, and it's well constructed, and it's a little bit gamified and a bit fun. So that piece is good. And then the first engagement is good. And then how they move you through the process is really good, and it's seamless. And they just care about the customer experience piece, and they recognize that it runs all the way through the sales cycle, and actually out the other end into the customer experience piece and into the second and subsequent transactions. Because a lot of the time, a customer is only a customer when they buy from you for the second time. The first time, they're just giving you an opportunity and seeing how you do with it, and then you unlock the bigger piece. And many businesses are falling over at that stage. So that's the best. The worst, they're just going head down, keep doing what we're doing, double down on it, throw more money at old school methodologies that used to work for us because we don't know what else to do. And Tony, would know a ton of businesses, as would Wayne and Steve, that are doing that. They're like, I had a call from a guy who I used to work with, mid-50s. He's saying, and he joined a business. He was like, Cian, I'm being asked to do cold calling, like all week. I'm just going to be cold calling. Is that normal? And I was like, hate that, mate. That's rough. But that was the strategy they had. I'd get everyone in a war room, I'd pick up the phone and just call lots and lots of people without even doing the pre-work of saying, well, who are we going to call? So that's the worst excesses. That's where it's just, head down, ostrich, keep doing what we're doing in the hopes that maybe all of a sudden it'll start working again. Yeah. Does that help, Clarence?
Be interested in further reading on that or suggestions about some companies to take a look at and
Sure.
see how they do it.
Yep. Question over here.
Hi, Cian. It's Fidos here from Red Hat. We're just in the process of hiring a ton of people, and I keep looking at the JDs that are in the system.
Yeah.
And the profile seems to be the same profile I saw 20 years ago when I was selling.
Yeah.
Just wondering if you can give some tips on the 3 or 4 things or characteristics that make a great salesperson today, because I think it's changed.
Yeah, I agree.
That would be quite helpful.
Yeah. I was talking to a sales leader the other day, and he told me something really interesting. He said one of the questions he always asks is, what do you do from a volunteering, a charitable perspective, or whatever, and how often people give him a blank look, because he's like, we're looking for people who care not just in a work environment but care outside. He'll ask them, what was the last sales book you read? And again, he'll often get blank looks because we're looking for people who take a little bit of ownership and responsibility of their own development, as distinct from just putting the onus back on the vendors they work with. I think the other thing which is really interesting is stop looking for salespeople in the pool of salespeople and look for salespeople within your customers. Look for salespeople who are, even on the consulting side, but have the people skills, or pre-sales, or even outside of all those areas, but people who have the right blend of kind of curiosity and professionalism, and they can follow up on things. Because it isn't rocket science what we're being asked to do necessarily, but it does require, being the conductor of the orchestra, being able to work with people. So the EQ piece is important internally and externally, in my experience. The curiosity is where the deal values grow. Because if you're asking the second and subsequent and third and fourth question, and then they kind of throw away comment is like, well, look, if we don't get this sorted, the reputational hit is going to be enormous, and that's going to hit our share price, and you're like, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. And all of a sudden, this little thing over here unlocks this mountain of risk over here, and the conversation changes. But you won't get there if you just ask that first question. So I think it is people who are intellectually curious, people who've got maybe a level of different skills and experiences rather than just, I've got a 30-year, repping on my CV. I was guilty in my career of not investing in myself. So there'd be all these great training opportunities, development. I was like, I'm too busy. I'm chasing a big number. Like an idiot, right? Because I stopped investing in myself because I thought the number was the be-all and the end-all. So I think it's people who can demonstrate that they've got some level of just intellectual curiosity about other stuff, as well as curiosity engaging with the customer. They don't have to be writers. There's a battle raging at the moment on LinkedIn. Should salespeople be creating content? Shouldn't they? My view is, if they can write good content and they have good insights, sure. And if they can't, then they can curate content and share that and wade in with an opinion or whatever. So those two things aren't mutually exclusive. So I don't think you have to say, if you're not a compelling writer. But one of the things is, you do need to be able to write good emails. You do need to be able to write, good executive summaries if you're the one owning that piece. So if you're not literate in that sense, then you're going to struggle. So one of the things I'd be getting people to do is, write some stuff and show us what the quality of your writing is.
Cian, I remember an interview I did with you once, and we were discussing this subject, and you also indicated one of the things that came out of all your win-loss reviews you did with customers, the customers are telling you the best salespeople were the ones who were more humble and introverted than the opposite.
Yeah, which
and
really
I'm seeing
surprised
more
me.
of
I
that.
talked about that in the book, actually. It really surprised me. Because humble means I don't want to make it about me, I want to make it about you. And people really, really appreciate that. I talk a little bit about EQ, and I sometimes will share a slide of my mum when I was growing up, a picture of her and my dad. My mum, people love my mum. They're like, oh, your mum's lovely. Donica would know that. Irish mums, your mum's lovely. And what they really mean was, your mum is really interested in me. So my mum would meet people and be fascinated by them and ask them lots of questions and be genuinely fascinated with no agenda. And as a result, people thought she was lovely because what she was doing was saying, I'm interested in you. I find you, fascinating. And it would annoy the crap out of her. She'd be like, I met your neighbor up the road. She's blah, blah, blah. And she'd tell me their life story. And she's invited me to, go and stay in her. And I was like, what do you, I don't even know who that person is. That's just the person she was. It's that kind of generosity of spirit and innate curiosity and being able to walk in someone else's shoes and understand where they're at and sympathize and commiserate with them. And it might be in a business context, but it might not be. Like that CIO I spoke to yesterday, he said, this risk sits with me. And I've asked so many different senior leaders the risk question, and they're like, oh, you can't share risk, we own the risk. And I'll ask a follow-up question. And then eventually they'll say, the buck stops with me. So if this all falls over, it's my career, it's my this, it's my that. That's very, very interesting. Because then if you can help them in that respect, you know what? Price point goes out the window. All these other things go out the window because their unconscious bias is saying, I want to hold the person or the organization that can best manage my risk, and everything else will sort of, we'll come up with excuses why they're the best fit. Yes, Daniel?
Thanks. My name's Dan Churches. I'm with Dimension Data, or NTT. Cian, you've shared a lot of points today about, what I would almost call organizational change. So how do you coach clients or individuals who are in a leadership position to help them structure the change you're asking them to look at in their business, a methodology by which they can affect change in the business and not just talk about the bullet points?
Yeah. I think the first thing I ask them is, how have you done other change projects in the past? Because a lot of it relates to how does the business work, and the kind of the interoperability of the different parts of the business. And then to a point someone else made, to say, look, let's break it down by function. So rather than trying to hold this all to ourselves, let's look at key areas. We did some work with one of the leading medical waste removal companies in North America. So quite random, wasn't an area that we'd ever worked in. And what they did, which was so nice, was they went out and talked to a ton of their customers. They took all of those learnings, captured them, broke them down by kind of key area of their business, and then assigned old owners and put it all together. And then that became a part of their board process. So every quarter their board get together, and now what they've done is their board fly in a day early, and they all have to go out and meet customers because they never spoke to customers. So now they all do that, and then they come back and they say, how are we tracking on these change initiatives? So that's become a real focus of the board meetings as well as the management meetings. So I think it's about saying, are we clear on what the problem is and how we need to move the needle? And then it becomes a little bit easier. So I don't say, here's the methodology you must follow. I say, here's the stuff we know. Here's the outcome we think. And we'll always give guidance and recommendations to say, if this was our business, here's the 5 things we'd do in this order, and this is who should own it. But ultimately, the onus is on the organization to say, do we have the appetite for change? Do we have a capacity to do some of these things, and then prioritizing it and then pulling the trigger? But also, once you share it with everyone, it actually becomes a hell of a lot easier because we've identified the problem. So what are we going to do? Are we going to keep making? Because sales reps won't accept that. They won't accept that if you're saying, we now know it's a resourcing issue or this, but we're still not going to fix it. Follow-up question.
Well, kind of.
Okay.
Maybe comment. But, as you were just speaking about the methodology of a sales engagement that improves your likelihood of success, so is there also methodology around change management in an organization to improve the likelihood that the changes you're instigating will actually sink in and hit rubber on the road.
Absolutely.
And that becomes just as critical as the customer engagement
100%.
You're trying to affect too.
Yeah. And I don't, we're not a change management organization, but where we probably evolved from was, in the early days, I thought giving companies the insights was our job. It was like, we're going to tell you what the customers are saying, now you go away and fix it. And then I realized, actually, that's not what it's about. It's saying, we're going to tell you what they're saying, and then we're going to tell you what we would do in the context of if it was our business. And then where we can help you, or we'll introduce you to our partners, or it'll be internal people. So we don't have all the answers, but it's a hell of a lot easier when you have clarity around what the problems are. All of a sudden, we can get our heads around what do we need to do to fix it. Yeah.
Cian McLoughlin, thank you very much. Well done.